Okay, this is the first presentation that we're putting up on the subject of Islam. Islam's the third of the Western religions that we're looking at, and it's also the last religion in the series of studies of the world religions that we're doing as well. I will put up a second video on Islam that will be devoted to practices and principles and the five pillars in particular. Here, I'd just like to tell the story of the early beginnings, the story of the Prophet. Islam forbids the use of images of Muhammad. So I was looking for something, and I thought this image of the Kaaba is an appropriate one to start off with. So this is the center of the Islamic world, the most holy site in Islam, and Muslims, when they pray in the direction of Mecca and actually in the direction of the Kaaba. One of the interesting legends about the Kaaba is that it contains a black stone in the eastern corner, and this stone, the legends say, was given to Adam when they were expelled from the garden. It was given to Adam for the forgiveness of sins. And originally the stone was white, but it turned black as the result of absorbing the sins of all the pilgrims who came to visit the Kaaba, who touched it or kissed it over many of all the centuries of the history of Islam. So it's no longer possible to touch the black stone, but people can view it through a special window in the Kaaba. So it's an interesting ritual, the pilgrimage to Mecca and to the Kaaba, and to have a place where one can mark the center of one's religious beliefs. But let's take a look then at how it all got started with the Prophet Muhammad. We can start by pointing out that Islam has a common origin with Judaism and Christianity. You'd say all three of these Western religions trace their ancestry back to the biblical patriarch Abraham. If you recall the stories that we told when we talked about Judaism, about how difficulty Abraham had with Sarah. I mean, they couldn't conceive a child, so Abraham had a child by Hagar, and that was Ishmael. And so Ishmael separated from Abraham and the rest of the tribe, and was subsequently became the founder of the Arabic peoples, according to the biblical stories. And one story has it that there was contact, at least in Islam, there's a belief that there was contact between Abraham and Ishmael continued, and that it wasn't totally separate. And one of the stories is that the Kaaba, the kind of center of focus in Mecca, where Muslims pray sort of towards that. The Kaaba is kind of the central building there, which was supposedly built by Ishmael and Abraham together as a kind of place of worship or sacrifice for the worship of the one God. In Islam, that's going to be Allah, And in Judaism, it was Yahweh. Christianity, we just say God. In spite of having all this background in common, it's still pretty clear that Islam is a very difficult religion to understand for most Westerners. And why that's the case is a good question. And simply we could just say that Islam is sort of a complicated mix of religion, culture, and geography. And I can't say too much more about it at the moment. We could also point out that that Islam has been in conflict with the West for about 1400 years, almost from the point of its origin. If you consider that the West has been primarily religiously Christian, there's been conflict between Islam and Christianity from the very onset when Islam appeared. In spite of whatever impressions we have of Islam, I mean, the literal meaning of Islam is peace that comes when one's life is surrendered to God. So this idea of surrender to Allah, allow your life to be governed by God, is the central tenet of Islam. Muhammad was born in 570, that's AD, in Mecca. At the time of his birth, where he was born in the Arab world was a kind of chaotic situation. I think somewhat similar to what we talked about that Confucius faced when Confucius was born, that there was not much social organization in the area. The state, I'm sort of quoting Houston Smith here, the state of affairs was referred to as ignorant and characterized by tribal strife, brigandage, drunken debauchery, and gambling. There were many religions which were observed in the area, and I think for the most part they were polytheistic or animistic. Mecca was kind of a center for the tribes who followed these different religions would still come there and use the Kaaba as a central focus point. I mean, to do their sacrifices and their rituals and so forth. So Mecca was already kind of a thriving kind of area because people would come there for that purpose. When Muhammad was born, I mean, his mother and his father died while he was still very young. After which he went to his grandfather, and but then his grandfather also died not long after, and he ended up living with an uncle. It was important in this area, I mean, that it was a tribal situation. I mean, to be born into a tribe that had some standing, and Muhammad was born into the tribe of the Quraysh, which was the tribe that sort of maintained whatever order there was in Mecca at that time. So it was important to have some representation or some connection with the tribal leaders. So to lose his parents and then to lose his grandfather would have left Muhammad kind of as an orphan without any official status in that area. It would have been very difficult for him. But he did stay with his uncle, who was also a member of that tribe. As a young man, as usual, there's not a whole lot known, but it looks as though he worked for a time as a shepherd. And that, again, these are some of the stories that people would tell later. But the feeling was that he was, even as a young man, was noted for his kindness and his upright character. And early on, it seemed like his character was interested in introspection, and he was thought to be somebody who was blessed in some respects. He built a good reputation for himself in the caravan business, and at the age of 25, he married an older widow who was wealthy and involved in trade that was carried out by caravans and so forth. She recognized something special in Muhammad, and she was the one who initiated the marriage. But this was, a successful marriage and for Muhammad. After his marriage to Khadijah, Muhammad would frequently go to the cave, or a particular cave on Mount Hira, and there as he meditated or whatever he was doing, I'm not quite sure, but he became convinced that there was only one God, and that God would be referred to as Allah. So there is no God but God. About the 610, Muhammad became aware that he'd been chosen to be a prophet. And at this point, I think he's 40 years old. He's been married for about 15 years. So he's been visiting the caves on Mount Hira and having, kind of religious type experiences. But at the age of 40, he becomes pretty convinced that he's been called to be a prophet, to bear witness to what he's seeing. So from this time forward, for the next 23 years, he receives what he takes to be the words of God. Not that God spoke to him directly, but God spoke through the angel Gabriel. And this was the source of what will end up being the Quran. And after a certain point, Muhammad felt that his witness should include, trying to pass on the messages that he was receiving to other people. And he began to teach in Mecca, to preach. He attracted some followers, but not so many. In general, in Mecca at the time, his teachings were received with hostility. Say why the hostility? I mean, he was teaching a message that was different from what the other religious teachings had to say about things. For one thing, his religion was monotheistic, while almost all of the others that were popular at this time and place were polytheistic, animistic, as I said. And he also emphasized morality in his teaching, and there was definitely not much morality in the area, or not much inclination to be receptive to teaching that called for people to have moral codes and so forth. And he also, part of his teaching was social equality, but it's like social inequality was everywhere around. It was like it was a tribal life for everyone, and the tribes were arranged in definite hierarchies. If you were born into a prosperous tribe or one that had some standing, you were well off, but if you were born into a lesser tribe, you wouldn't have much to hope for in life. So he continued with his teaching in spite of the fact that he just met pretty limited success. Even after 10 years of teaching, he'd only attracted about 100 families, a couple hundred followers maybe. And there was still a lot of resistance to his teaching that he had to deal with and persecution in Mecca. The significant moment, in the development of Islam came in 622 when Muhammad received an invitation from Yathrib, a city or population center about 280 miles north of Mecca. They invited him to come and to help organize that city, which had a lot of strife and disagreement and so forth. So Muhammad had a good reputation, and people thought that maybe he could help them to a better kind of organization in Yathrib. So things weren't so good in Mecca, and Muhammad decided to go, so him and his followers made this trip to Yathrib. Later on, this trip was really a turning point for Muhammad and his followers. This trip, called the Hijra, was designated as the year 0 in the Islamic calendar. And subsequently, after Muhammad was in Yathrib, that city, as a result of his successful reign there, that city would change its name to Medina. So in Medina, Muhammad was both the spiritual and the political leader, and very successfully. So Medina thrived underneath his leadership and his direction. Even though things were good in Medina, there were still conflicts with Mecca. The Meccans resented Muhammad and his new religion, so there was a number of battles between Mecca and Medina. And eventually, the forces of the Muslims were victorious in around 630, at which point Muhammad returned to Mecca victorious and offered those he had defeated, the opportunity to, peacefully sort of surrender, and if they wanted to, they could become Muslims, and most of them sort of became Muslims as a result. Muhammad's life didn't last too much longer after this victory, and he died a couple years later in 632. But even by the time he died, that the word of his teaching and the success of it spread widely throughout the Arabian Peninsula, and Arabia was united under his leadership for basically the first time in its history. After Muhammad died, Islam spread really widely and rapidly throughout North Africa, and also further into the Middle East. And in the West, it went across North Africa and up into Spain and even into southern France. It wasn't until the Muslim forces were finally defeated by Charles Martel in about 733, the Battle of Tours, And if you read the historical accounts, it was a bit of luck that Charles Martel was able to defeat the Muslims. He caught them off guard. Otherwise, the advance of Islam into Europe might have changed the history of Europe from the one that we're familiar with. I've included this map at the end of this video just to give you some perspective on the extent of and the rapid sort of expansion of Islam after the death of Muhammad, even during his lifetime. It was as though the areas that are indicated here were kind of ripe for or in need of the kind of order that Muhammad's teaching brought into the societies in a way. So we can see here in the Arab Peninsula, this is the first area here. This is by the time the death of Muhammad. This tan color is already unified underneath his religious organization. And within, the next 30 years, the spread, the messengers have gone out from Mecca and Medina, and the missionary efforts, I guess, sort of show this whole area in Syria, Armenia, Iran, all the way up into Afghanistan and so forth, through Egypt, and then starting along the north of Africa to spread this religion and to convert people. A lot of that was military excursions, but a lot of people willingly sort of embraced the new religion because they saw the benefits of doing so. In this light purple, as you go across into northern Africa in the direction of through Tripoli and then into Spain, and at the beginning, on the borders of France here, you can see that within 750, that was the extent of the conquered territory, or the territory that had been converted to Islam or organized under Islamic principles under the Umayyad dynasty. And that's barely 100 years from the death of Muhammad. And as I said, up here in this upper part there, that's Tours, and that's roughly where the battle of where Charles Martel defeated the Muslim army that was moving into Europe at the time. And otherwise, the spread of Islam would have continued, and even further into what will end up being, Christian Europe. So this is the foundation. This is the beginnings of Islam that we've taken a look at. In subsequent videos, we want to look a little bit more at the nature of the sacred book, the Quran, and also what are the basic tenets of Islam. That's going to be the 5 pillars. So we'll do that on a subsequent video. I apologize for all the grammatical errors in this video. We're near the end of our time together, so this was written rather hastily.